Welcome to Professor Russell Esposito's channel on information security. This video is just one of many video modules that are part of Professor Esposito's course on the subject. Video modules for his entire information security course are located on this channel. So remember to hit the like button as well as subscribe if you enjoy the video. Thank you for watching.
Quantum computing and cryptography. IBM, Google, and others are working on quantum computing, and these computers exist. They're in their infantile state, but they do exist. And the problem is that the National Security Agency has a concern that because of the astronomical power of these computers, the current cryptography, the algorithms, can be broken rather easily. The keys can be generated, and our security, our encryption, will be completely worthless. So, and NIST understands this, and they're working with the NSA, the National Security Agency, has a warning about it, and NIST is working on a competition to develop new algorithms to be sort of a quantum proof. But the real race is getting a quantum computer. I mean, we're going to need to move from classic computing and classical algorithms generated on current kinds of computers, which are now being called classical. We're going to need to create a whole new cryptography system with quantum computers to be able to always defeat a quantum hacker. So let's go through what quantum computing is and some of the issues related to it. So how real is this risk? How real is the threat? This is a slide put together by IBM. And if you look at the left-hand side, there's some time frames. In the short term, not really much of a concern in terms of risk. It's medium, it's orange on the right-hand side. But in 5 to 10 years, the risk is high, and in 10 to 20 years, the risk is extreme. This is a reality at that point, that quantum computing will be able to crack our encryption very easily. So within the next 5 to 10 years, we have to have a solution. We have to have first wave of solution is sort of encryption using classic computers, the current kinds of computers, to generate quantum proof algorithms that we feel would be relatively safe in the event that a hacker or a nation state that's an opponent or an enemy gets a quantum computer before we do. We might have some way to defend using classic computers and new kinds of algorithms. And that's a NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have a competition out right now for quantum proof algorithms. But again, that's a short-term temporary solution. The real solution is to move all of our cryptography and encryption to something that's generated with quantum computers to be able to defeat a hacker with a quantum computer. So as you can see from this time frame, 5-10 years, we really have to have some kind of at least temporary solution. And within 10 years or so, we need to have a quantum solution, a completely new quantum-based encryption systems for the internet and for other purposes. What exactly is a quantum computer? So at a very high level, first of all, it's based on quantum mechanics, on physics. So it's really based on some unusual properties in physics or in quantum mechanics, which is a specialization within physics. So it's not using the traditional sort of electrical circuits that we're accustomed to in classic or current computing. But rather than have a bit, a quantum computer has something called a qubit, based on quantum, a qubit. And you see at the bottom of the screen here, there are two unique properties of a qubit: superposition and entanglement. Superposition means the value of the qubit can be sort of on and off at the same time. And entanglement is how qubits affect each other. So let's look at the next couple of slides to get a better understanding of this. The architecture of our current, or classic, as it's being called now, computers is based on electrical circuits. And you see here the word classic in the bit, sort of 2/3 over in your screen. A bit is either 0 or 1, as you can see here. It's either on or off, or maybe low circuit and a high circuitry. It could be low voltage and high voltage, but it's either one or the other. It's not both, right? In qubit, with a qubit in quantum computing, it could be 0 and 1 at the same time. It's called superposition. It's a little hard to comprehend. When you actually measure the qubit, it's in one state, and it's really based on probability. It's a probabilistic system that repeats calculations until accuracy becomes more and more closer to reality. So it's a very different way to compute, because superposition means this quantum computer can be in two positions at the same time. It could represent off or on. It can represent low and high at the same time, which is kind of hard for us to grasp. But this is all based on quantum mechanics. And the other, I guess, characteristic or property of quantum mechanics is that when you apply it with a qubit, with a quantum computer, there's these qubits have relationships with each other. It's called entanglement. And these properties allow the quantum computer to calculate at enormously higher rapid rates. And we're going to show you a little some examples of that later on. But it just changes the complete world in terms of computing power. There's no comparison between the current computer technology, these classic computers, and quantum computers. They're worlds and worlds, quantums apart, let's say. Well, let's go on and look at this a little bit further. So how does a quantum computer really work? It can use supercomputing circuits with electromagnetism, or it can use light, photons. And doing some research on quantum computers, it looks like they're really relying on both to a large degree, light more than anything else. But there are some superconducting circuits involved as well, but mostly it's light. It's very fragile. Consider a qubit like a soap bubble. Very, very, very fragile. These quantum computers have to be kept extremely cold, like literally close to absolute zero. So they have to be contained. They're not easily, maintained and built, but they have these special properties. Again, whether you're using a superconducting circuit or whether you're using light, photons, they have this superposition capability and this entanglement between different qubits working together to help the computing process. This slide references a few videos I'd like you to watch. And again, these links can be pulled off a Blackboard. If for some reason you can't access them, you can always get them off the schedule. 1 to 16 minutes, and a really interesting experiment with a deck of cards that I think you'll be amazed to watch. And the other is an update that this particular fellow does every year on quantum computing. So this is the latest, 2021. It's 13 minutes. I think you'll find it interesting. Finally, I'm a big Joe Rogan fan. If you like Joe Rogan, optional, you can watch with a scientist, the scholar Sean Carroll. He also explains quantum computing. But minimally watch the first two videos that I referenced on this slide. I think you'll find them interesting and enjoyable. I suppose it's obvious, but perhaps it's worth underscoring that quantum computing is not something that can be applied just for the IT industry or cryptography. It can be applied for lots of different scientific disciplines and mathematics and pure research, as well as applied industries or applied science. So the impact will be amazing. And the other thing is that quantum computing can support the development of artificial intelligence. And similarly, artificial intelligence could help advance quantum computing. So you'll see this, I think, a symbiotic relationship between quantum computers and the development of artificial intelligence. As we said in the earlier slides, quantum cryptography will someday be able to crack our asymmetric encryption keys. And to some extent, some of the symmetric keys as well will have to be modified to try to defend from quantum cryptography. So this is really a race between, sort of the good guys and the bad guys, right? Who will get to quantum computing and quantum cryptography first? So that's why it's so urgent that the National Security Agency and the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, NIST, are all engaged in figuring out the best way to defend. And you can see in this chart on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the companies that are involved everywhere from IBM to Google, when they started, what year they started with quantum computing to begin to build these systems in a small experimental state, but they're being built and they are built. I've had an opportunity to see, when you'll see in the next couple of slides, what they look like and a little bit more about the internals. But if you look here, as you go down this left-hand side, there's a company called Rigetti, R-I-G-E-T-T-I. and they build lots of quantum computers. Again, lots. When I mean lots, they build most of them. There aren't that many in the world. There's a couple hundred, 200 or 300, but they have a nice website. I'll guide you through a little bit that really shows the internals of how it's built and how it works. Sort of at a high level what the framework is like. It's kind of interesting. So with that said, let's go a little bit deeper and let's see what one of these machines looks like. So there are two quantum computers on the slide displayed. One is the Google Sycamore 53 qubits, and IBM has a brand new, in 2021, 127 qubit machine. And these are, again, the one on the right-hand side is not fully displayed because it's within its air-conditioned environment. The Google one is really a display item that IBM also has these on display in their Watson Research Center. But just to give you an idea of what they look like. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit the IBM Watson Research Center, and here I am in the left side of this picture, pictured next to one of the Watson quantum computers. To the right is a close-up of that computer. Of course, it's not in its air-conditioned shell, which has to be kept close to an absolute zero temperature for it to function. But what's interesting is if you go to the Rigetti website, R-I-G-E-T-T-I, at the bottom of this slide, there's a website. And they show, if you scroll down on the website from the main page, they show the 5 main components. So it gives you an understanding of what this complicated menage looks like, because it looks like a chandelier almost hanging from some sort of structure. But they break down the 5 major components of a quantum computer. So it's kind of interesting if you want to go to that site, rigetti.com, and you'll see sort of a green screen. Scroll down, you'll see the 5 components, and it's an interactive website, so you can kind of look at and read these 5 different pieces. It's pretty interesting. This is a slide that IBM prepared, and they're really displaying the industries that are most interested in quantum cryptography. And I guess it's probably something you would have guessed. You can see the government and the defense agencies are very interested, as well as banking and financial services. Well, these are the organizations that have the most to lose if they fall behind in this technology. So as you can see, they're very engaged, and they will continue to be. And then as you look to the right of the slide, you can see there are other industries involved, or have interest, I should say, but they're not immediately threatened by a quantum cryptography that can defeat their existing encryption and cryptography as technology as exists today in the classic computing world. So if you look at this slide, the top half talks about the symmetric keys, AES and the SHA type hash calculations, and they'll need much longer keys to defend against quantum computing. Longer keys needed, larger output needed for the hash functions. So you have some, I guess, short-term solutions that can sort of defend against quantum computing. If your algorithms are based on current technology, you might be able to increase the key or increase the larger output of the hash and defend against quantum computing for a while. But if you look at the second half, the bottom half of the screen, really speaks to the public key infrastructure. The asymmetric public-private keys that are used for e-commerce and banking, and also digital signatures. As you can see here, there's a elliptical curve digital signature algorithm, the bottom one, ECDSA. So these keys, these public keys, will become completely insecure. So we really need a solution. The only real solution against an attack that's using a quantum computer is to have your own cryptography based, and your encryption and your hashing based on quantum computing as well. If you recall, when we reviewed the network fundamentals, we talked about the OSI 7-layer stack of communications, which explains how the internet works, from physical through logical and networking right up to the application. So there's a similar stack, like for the quantum computers, for its own internal processing, for its communication and processing. So I thought you might find this stack interesting. The National Institute of Standards and Technologies, aka NIST is working with industry and university participants. So clearly IBM, Google, others, on a solution that would to have a framework that we can have some new kind of digital signatures and private public keys, create a new public key infrastructure that could protect against a quantum computer. Again, this is sort of a short-term a short-term resolution. The absolute resolution is to have a quantum computer create all of our encryption and have our whole all of our algorithms based on that. So they have a competition list, and they hope to have by 2024 a basic framework for having algorithms that could defeat or at least protect somewhat against a quantum computer attack. Ultimately, we need cryptography to be based on a quantum computer. So there are 4 components of that, and the next several slides, again, these are mostly IBM slides, put together these, list these 4 components of a quantum cryptographic system or infrastructure. So the first is a quantum-based random number generated. So there's a little picture here, it might look like a chip or something, but the concept is to have, tremendous entropy, tremendous randomness using a quantum computer. So there would have to be some sort of new generation based on a quantum system to generate numbers that are ultimately very, very random with, tremendous entropy, which makes them much, much more difficult. The more entropy, the more randomness, the difficult it is to crack or hack or understand what the encryption might mean. So of course we need a quantum-based random number generator, but then you've got this key created, you need to distribute it. So you need a quantum-based key distribution to distribute those keys. So, again, it'll be based on photons. And the very interesting thing about having a photon-based key distribution is that if there's a man in the middle or some sort of intermediary that is trying to observe and look at the traffic, that can be detected. Just looking at the traffic, just trying to observe the transfer of the key can be detected using photons in a cryptographic system based on quantum computing. So it's really sort of an interesting concept to be able to detect anyone trying to access it or look at it while the photon-based keys is being transmitted. The third component is a quantum-resistant algorithm. So we saw that we need tremendous entropy with a random number generator, and we need to have a way to distribute keys, but we also need an algorithm that is based and generated using quantum computers, but it can be resistant through its complexity, resistant to attack by a quantum computer that's attempting to defeat the algorithm and crack the logic behind it. The fourth component of a new quantum cryptographic system would be certificates. So we learned earlier that these digital certificates that are provided for websites, they provide the keys, the public and private key used for the PKI, public key infrastructure, so that we know when we see a certificate on a website, we know that these keys for their encryption were from a third party, they're authentic, they work properly, they have sufficient complexity, they meet certain standards, like typically the most common asymmetric algorithm is RSA, that there's some definition and explanation in the certificate about what's used for encryption, what's used for hashing, those kinds of things are on the certificate. So that certificate, there'll be a classic digital certificate that we have now combined with a quantum safe, a quantum-based certificate, and in conjunction, these two certificates would provide a very secure, safe certificate, again, to ensure authenticity of the site and that its encryption methods meet all the standards, and that the certificates can't be forged, they can't be counterfeited, that this new kind of certificate would provide that sort of authenticity and assurance to someone who's using the website that these keys are in fact authentic and safe for use. This slide summarizes the four components. It's a summary of the quantum cryptography planning to have something that can replace our existing system and also defend against a quantum computer-based attack. So again, on the left-hand side of the screen, a quantum-based random number generated. That's has extreme entropy, extreme randomness. In the center of the screen, a method to have a quantum key distribution. So the photons would be used as a way to distribute the keys, and that there'd be a quantum-resistant algorithms with sufficient complexity to defend against an attack. And finally, to have quantum-based certificates, as we just described in the earlier slide, to ensure those visiting a website that the encryption is proper, that it's It's been provided by a third party. We know that the standards have been met, and the encryption is thorough, complete, meets all the standards, and the website can be trusted essentially. Thank you for listening to the presentation on quantum computing and cryptography, and we've reached the end of this presentation.